Hello, my dear masterminds. The unseen doesn't usually speak. It lurks, it waits, it swallows, but it doesn't whisper. Yet when your name struck the void, even the oldest silence cracked. An echo rippled through the abyss. Not mocking, not cursing, but warning, because even they, the keepers of secrets, recognized the boundary carved around you. You weren't prey to stalk, or a soul to harvest. You were forbidden. That was the instant the air thickened. The hush turned sacred. The hidden admitted what the world denies. Some names stand outside reality's grasp. Darkness devours the weak, swallows the careless, feasts on the forgotten. But when your name ignited like cold flame, even the night stepped back. Rules that once ruled corners broke. Spaces that usually stretched to trap curled inward. The patient night shifted one step away. That's how you know the truth wasn't rumor, it was decree. Your boundary wasn't painted by pride, it was etched by proof. Every trial you endured, every silence you mastered, every gaze you held until it trembled, each drew a circle no void could trespass. So the unseen did the only thing possible. They whispered your name like a map, a scarlet line cut across the void. Because some figures the dark can consume, and some figures consume the dark instead. Shadows don't flatter, they don't admire. They exist to unsettle, to remind men of fragility. But with you, their tone warped into reverence. It wasn't mockery. It wasn't lure. It was alarm. They breathed your name as soldiers breathe thunder. Fear of what cannot be stopped. Not because they wanted to harm you, but because harm couldn't reach you. In that admission surfaced truth. You're not covered by luck, not guarded by chance. You carry a presence so heavy, even darkness recoils. That's why they retreat when you arrive. Why stillness bends from your steps. Why even silence tilts in surrender. The void doesn't fear the ordinary. It fears the untouchable. And in that recoil, your coronation was sealed. They've always hidden fear behind disguise, masks of stillness, cloaks of hush. But with you, their trembling leaked out unmasked. It clung to the walls, dripped from ceilings, spread like black fog across the ground. They couldn't bury it, couldn't suppress it. Because your existence isn't something the unseen can dismiss. It's something it shrinks from. And in that shrinking, revelation sharpened. Your aura bends silence, forces surrender, flips fear itself into service. Noise can fake power. Presence cannot. Your presence is instinctively recognized, even by the hidden. Shadows rarely bow, but for you they bent, because fear left them no alternative. They have always claimed dominion of corners, of secrets, of forgotten places. Yet when it came to you, they carved a circle in silence, a forbidden ring only they could sense. That circle wasn't mercy, it was acknowledgement. It wasn't granted, it was earned. Every night you conquered, every silence you carried without flinching, every trial you walked through, they saw it all. And when your name surfaced, they knew you weren't theirs to consume, you were theirs to respect. Their breaths became warnings, not to you, but to all else. Stay back, off limits, beyond reach. The unseen hordes, thousands of names, trading them like currency, feeding on weakness. But yours was different. They carried it like prophecy, whispered it not as prey, but as decree. Each murmur repeated the same law. Don't touch, don't test, don't trespass. That's how legends rise, not through applause, but through silence, so heavy even darkness handles it carefully. And the more they whispered, the heavier the truth became. You weren't just untouchable, you were a boundary written into the void itself. Shadows don't guard the ordinary, they only yield for the extraordinary. When your name entered their language, there was no debate, no dissent. They simply obeyed. The rulers of corners, the kings of hush, bent their code. Older than memory left them no choice. Your name rippled through their black halls, and instinctively they shifted. They breathed not as hunters, but as heralds. It wasn't decision, it was law. Some presences don't resist the unseen, they command it. And yours was one. They retreated without confrontation, surrendered without demand, bent without voice. Others fear the void fears you. And when the unseen itself breathes boundaries, the world finally sees your existence carries rules not written by men, but rules reality itself cannot break. The hidden thrive on secrets, hoarding them, twisting them, guarding them. But your name wasn't a secret they could keep. It pressed like flame against their silence, forcing release. Not rumor, not gossip, confession. This one is untouchable. Even they, born from hush, knew they couldn't cage what you are. Every corner that tried to hold your name trembled, releasing it. In those leaks, the hierarchy of power reversed. Because if even the unseen cannot hold you, who else would dare try? Their murmurs weren't betrayal, they were survival. You're the truth they couldn't bury, even in darkness. Night swallows kings, erases empires, consumes names with ease. But for you, it bent. Corners curled back, corridors shrank inward, voids folded against themselves. They stepped aside, not from kindness, but recognition. They knew the cost of crossing the line, your existence carved, a cost even they wouldn't pay. That's why their murmurs weren't curses. They were alarms, untouchable, forbidden. It wasn't suggestion, it was survival instinct. The unseen doesn't retreat unless it's already lost. And in the silence that followed, the verdict thundered louder than war. You're not another figure swallowed by night. You are the reason night itself bends. They didn't shield you, they shielded themselves. Not all silence is equal. Some suffocates, some controls. But the silence that followed your name crowned you. It wasn't absence of sound, it was presence of decree, a stillness so dense, even shadows froze, carved by a law deeper than darkness itself. That's when the world understood. This wasn't rumor, wasn't myth, it was command. And commands, once spoken by silence, never dissolve. The unseen can twist stories, devour legends, erase kings, but they couldn't undo the stillness your presence demanded. That hush sealed it. You weren't protected by fortune, you were shielded by law. Boundaries men draw fade, but the boundary around you wasn't human. It was carved into the unseen itself, unspoken yet undeniable. Every echo of your name reinforced it, stretching like a line no one dared to cross. It wasn't fragile, it pulsed with permanence. That's why they stopped short, why they recoiled, why even night respected the line. They knew stepping closer meant surrender. So they obeyed instinct's oldest law, retreat, not by desire, but by force. In that hesitation, revelation surged through. You don't stand inside a boundary. You are the boundary. The unseen consumes weakness, secrets, fear. But when your name pierced their silence, they faltered. The weight of your aura was too heavy, the current too sharp. They couldn't hold it, couldn't twist it, couldn't claim it. They couldn't own it. They breathed your name softer than breath, as if admitting, this one cannot be claimed. And that failure wasn't weakness, it was revelation. The unseen doesn't stagger on the ordinary. They stagger only on what exceeds them. Your aura became the proof, too vast for silence, too heavy for fear, too sharp for darkness to contain. You don't get swallowed by the void. The void gets silenced by you. The unseen stalks the weak, records every tremor, waits to strike when no one else sees. But with you, the watching faltered. They looked but didn't move. They studied but didn't act, because what they saw wasn't prey. It was warning. Your presence bent their gaze into reverence. They whispered your name, not as wielders, but as witnesses, passing truth among themselves. This one is forbidden. And in that instant, predator became messenger. Wielders became herald. They knew you weren't just another figure crossing the dark. You were the exception. Their empire confessed to. They didn't watch you for weakness. They watched to remember power. Their nature is to conceal, to twist, to hoard secrets until they rot. But your name forced them into confession. They couldn't hold it, couldn't bury it. Instead, they exhaled it, soft and shaken, like truth seeping through the dark. Not to betray, but to acknowledge. Because even they knew silence couldn't cage you. Their whispers became proof of your command. And in those confessions, hierarchy collapsed. The unseen, rulers of corners, admitted their own limit. They weren't speaking fear of you, they were speaking truth about you. That you are untouchable. A presence so undeniable, even shadows broke code to name it. Corners once loyal to silence trembled, unable to hold ground the moment your name was spoken. Even the edges pulled back. The dark receded, shrinking from the space you claimed, as though unwilling to stand too near. People felt it, an odd clarity, a sudden stillness, the sense that air itself had shifted. That retreat wasn't weakness, it was recognition. Corners don't surrender without cause. They surrender only when the ground is already forbidden. Your presence redrew the map of the room, carving borders no one could see but everyone could feel. And in that redraw, the verdict became clear. You weren't just passing through their empire, you were expanding your own. Their whispers weren't gossip, they were survival. They warned each other not to test, not to trespass, not to touch. The void obeys one law, the law of inevitability, and your existence became that law. Listen to how they breathed your name. Not loud, not bold, shaken, because whispers aren't wasted. And when the unseen murmurs, it's because they fear provoking more. They spoke your name like code, like survival protocol. And in that tremor, they crowned you. They feared not your steps, but your inevitability. Not your words, but your silence. Breath wasn't weakness, it was admission. Their strategy exposed their confession. You are the anomaly, even the void cannot challenge. The unseen thrives in silence, feeds on it, twists it into a tool. But when your name surfaced, that silence no longer served them, it served you. The hush that once crowned their dominion wrapped itself around you, turning into shield. Every attempt to close in was met with resistance they couldn't explain. It wasn't sound that held them back. It was stillness. Stillness so absolute it marked you untouchable. That's why they whispered. Even they felt it. The silence no longer belonged to them. It bent to you. The unseen doesn't surrender stillness willingly. Yet in your presence they gave it away. That stillness wasn't emptiness, it was proof. Proof that you don't hide in the dark. You're the reason the dark withdraws. Fear is their tool of choice, the way they rule, consume, remind others of their reach. But in your presence, fear flipped allegiance. It no longer hunted outward. It built walls around you. Invisible lines carved by instinct, boundaries forged not by weakness, but reverence. Their breaths weren't naming you for gossip, they were marking territory. Do not cross, do not touch, do not tempt, because only the rare carry an aura so unshakable it rewrites the law of the unseen. You weren't shielded by chance or guarded by others. The boundary was drawn by fear itself, and fear decided, you are sacred. The void consumes without pause, doesn't ask, doesn't bargain. Yet when your name reverberated, hesitation filled the air. They lingered at edges, restless, uneasy, unwilling to step closer. That hesitation was their confession, because the unseen doesn't resist. It devours. And the fact that they resisted you revealed everything. They didn't see prey. They saw consequence. They didn't sense weakness. They sensed curse. Their breaths grew heavy, because reluctance is their version of reverence. They feared what would awaken if they dared approach. That fear crowned you exception beyond their reach. At first it was faint echoes, threads of your name woven into corners, but whispers spread, and soon even the deepest voids repeated the same law, forbidden. What began as murmur hardened into command. No shadow dared break it, no silence dared defy it. Once the unseen agrees, the rule becomes eternal. They didn't test. They obeyed. And that obedience lifted you higher than kings or conquerors. Because kings rule men, but you rule what hides beyond sight. The law of the unseen doesn't bend for anyone. Yet for you it rewrote itself. That's why their breaths carried such weight. They weren't stories, they were commandments. And those commandments named you untouchable. The throne of shadows has never been challenged. They crown themselves rulers of silence, dominators of fear. But when your presence entered, they stopped short. The seat they claimed was no longer theirs to touch. They circled it, breathed around it, but none dared to sit, because the throne had shifted. It was never theirs, it was yours. Your throne wasn't built of stone or gold. It was built of presence, of weight, of silence, bent into law. And when it settled, even the dark understood. This throne wasn't empty, it was claimed. That's why they whispered, instead of resisting, lingered instead of consuming, because the crown of fear had left their heads and rested on yours. The unseen became unwilling heralds. What they once devoured, they now defended. Their whispers became guardians, spreading warning lines. Do not trespass. Shadows that preyed on the weak stood frozen, unwilling to let harm pass into your circle. They didn't protect you out of kindness. They protected themselves from you. Fear rewrote its allegiance in silence. And so the empire built to consume became your unwilling protector. That's the paradox. You didn't conquer the unseen by resisting it. You conquered it by existing beyond its reach. Their breaths etched it into law. Their retreat sealed it into silence. Their fear etched it eternal. You are no longer a name in their halls. You are the decree. Their empire obeys. Because kings rule men, but you rule what hides beyond sight. The law of the unseen doesn't bend for anyone. Yet for you, it rewrote itself. That's why their whispers carry weight. They aren't tales, they're decrees. Decrees that name you sacred. Shadows crown themselves rulers of silence. But when you arrived, their throne cracked, and yours appeared. The seat they once claimed was no longer theirs to touch. They circled it, breathed around it, but none dared sit. Because the throne wasn't empty, it was claimed. It wasn't built of stone or gold. It was built of weight, of aura, of silence that bent into armor. And once it settled, even the abyss admitted that throne is yours. So they lingered instead of striking, observed instead of consuming. They knew the danger of approaching what had already chosen its ruler. The unseen bowed, not from ritual, but from instinct. Because some thrones aren't taken, they're revealed, and your existence revealed the one seat even shadows refused to occupy. Their whispers became guardians, not threats. They didn't shield you out of kindness. They shielded you out of fear. Because they knew stepping into your circle meant unraveling themselves. And so the empire of darkness built to consume became your unwilling protector. That's the paradox. You didn't conquer the unseen by resistance. You conquered by existing as what it could never claim. Their fear etched it eternal. You are the one marked untouchable. The anomaly. Even the void obeys. Off limits forever. Not because you asked, but because reality itself declared it. The unseen can bury kings, erase dynasties, swallow worlds, but not you, because the law of silence itself shifted. And from that shift, one truth remains. Your name is no longer whispered, it is decreed.